this short presentation, we are going to briefly look at the full candidate assessment process and the assessor's role at each stage. This is normally referred to as the assessment cycle. Assessment is a systematic process which is followed every time that you carry out an assessment with your candidates. This cycle is followed with each candidate until a successful outcome has been achieved or they have left the programme. There are 6 distinct parts to the assessment cycle. They are: 1. Initial assessment of the candidate. 2. Planning the assessment. 3. Assessment activities. 4. Assessing the evidence. 5. Recording the outcome. 6. Giving feedback and review progress. We will now go through each of the 6 areas in more detail so you can understand what happens. There are 2 types of assessment plans that are developed for the candidate. These are the holistic assessment plan and the ongoing assessment plan. Holistic assessment plan. There are also 2 types of holistic assessment planning. The first type is the first assessment plan you'll carry out on the initial meeting you have with your candidate. This plan is used to identify how they will achieve the whole qualification. It will set out the different units the candidate is going to take, together with the evidence they will need to provide to prove they are competent for each of the units and for the whole qualification. The purpose of a holistic plan is for the candidate to apply the units to their job role and to identify what aspects of their work, either performance or work products, they can use for evidence. It will also identify the different assessment methods to be used and what they will be used to assess. For some holistic plans, it will also have a target date for the candidate to be able to complete the whole qualification. The second type of holistic assessment can also form part of the ongoing assessment planning. In this instance, it means that instead of assessing units in isolation, you try to plan for assessment activities that can produce evidence for the number of units. For example, if you are planning to watch a candidate install a window, you may also see evidence of them working safely, moving and storing materials, complying with the specification, communicating with colleagues, and installing glass or panels. So from one assessment, you are assessing the candidate across a number of units, therefore making your assessment practice both efficient and effective. Agree to suitable assessment methods. Whenever you are planning an assessment with your candidate, it is good to discuss the different methods of assessment that are available to ensure that one most suited for the candidate and the criteria being assessed is used. For example, for knowledge criteria, a candidate may prefer to give verbal answers instead of written. They may have documentation they use to prove they have carried out certain tasks, such as signing for goods. By talking the criteria through with the candidate, they can help you to identify the best evidence for them to use to prove their competence. Outline the type and amount of evidence to be used. Within the plan, it is also good to outline the type of evidence to be used, e.g. observation, product evidence, written or verbal questioning, and the amount of each expected. For example, you might plan to observe a candidate install a window, so the plan could say you want the candidate to provide the evidence of an opportunity for you to see them fix a window frame into an aperture, a copy of the specification being used for the installation, answers to 5 written questions you have provided them with, a copy of the delivery note for the window, frame and glass for the work being carried out. Set target dates for completion. For any assessment plan you produce for a candidate, it is important to set completion dates, as this gives the candidate something to aim for and also lets them know when you will be assessing them. If you do not set a date for either the full completion of the qualification or for each ongoing assessment plan, you'll find the candidate is not as committed as they would be if they have set targets to meet. Setting a deadline sets the focus for the candidate and gives them something to achieve. Identify others who might need to get involved in the process. At the planning stage, it is also good to identify if there is anybody else who might need to be involved in assessment or need to be informed that an assessment is taking place. This may be the candidate's line manager, operational manager, installation team leader, company owner or site agent. This list is not exhaustive and is always best checked with the candidate for each assessment, as they will have an idea of who may need to be informed that assessment is taking place. It may also be someone who has been asked to provide a witness testimony to the candidate. Make a record and confirm with the candidate. It is best practice to record the assessment plan in writing. This is to ensure that both the assessor and the candidate know what is expected of them. The first part of the process is the initial assessment, and this is something that starts right at the beginning of the assessment process. So, why do we have an initial assessment? The main purpose of the initial assessment is to identify a starting point for your candidate. Each of your candidates is an individual, and they bring with them a different range of experiences, different skill sets, and their different candidate needs. The initial assessment is an important part of the process, as it sets out how the candidate will achieve the qualification and identify the right qualification for them to take. Some of the activities that an assessor will carry out at this stage include checking candidates' RPL. RPL stands for Recognition of Prior Learning. It is the process for recognising previous learning that has taken place in either informal or formal contexts, for example, in the workplace and through life experiences. Once recognised through this process, prior learning can be used to gain credit or exemption for qualifications and or for personal and career development. If RPL is carried out thoroughly enough, it may be that the candidate can use some of their previous experience to be awarded some of the criteria in their qualification. However, it is worth remembering that the candidate will need to provide some proof of their prior experience, and this can sometimes be harder for them to prove than actually taking the qualification itself. For example, the candidate has taken a qualification recently, say in Federation Installation Level 2, and is now coming to you to take the Level 3 qualification. You would be able to compare the units in both qualifications, and if the candidate has taken some of the relevant units already that are in the Level 3, he will not have to take these again. This is easy to prove, as they will have the qualification certificate for the Level 2 they have completed, which would outline the units they have qualified in. If a candidate comes for RPL and says they have worked in the industry for 10 years and have carried out a range of window and door installations, then this becomes a much harder thing to prove. The candidate will need to provide proof that they have carried out certain work, i.e. from letters of endorsement from a previous employer, or have their own photographic records. The assessor then needs to take time to authenticate all of this evidence, which is something that has to be carried out thoroughly. The question to ask at this point is it quicker to assess the candidate on their current performance rather than assess their past experience? Identify specific candidate needs. This is where the assessor works with the candidate to find out if the candidate has any issues which may get in their way of them achieving the qualification and giving them the same opportunity as others to achieve it. These specific candidate needs can cover many things. The most common is where the candidate may have dyslexia and need help with their knowledge assessment in some way, such as answering the questions verbally instead of written. The specific needs may also cover things such as the candidate only working on specific shifts, so the assessment might have to take place outside of normal working hours. Whatever their specific candidate needs is, it is up to the assessor to identify it and put it into place, a strategy for helping them to work out around it. Candidate's learning style. It is helpful to identify the candidate's preferred learning style. This will mean you can present information in a way which resonates with a preferred style. The four main learning styles are activist, theorist, pragmatic, and reflector. There are also those candidates who prefer to achieve information in either verbal, visual, or kinesthetic forms. For more information on these learning styles, refer to the handout in this topic section. Understand the candidate's job role. By having a conversation with the candidate, you can identify what their actual job is and the activities and tasks they carry out as part of this role. This will then help you with selecting the right qualification and level, and also the optional units which would be most applicable for them to take. Identify training needs. The initial assessment you carry out might also show that the candidate is either lacking a skill or some knowledge to be able to complete the qualification effectively. From this, you will be able to highlight any training they need and propose a way for them to gain the training or development they need. Decide on appropriate qualification and units. As a result of your initial assessment, you will have identified with your candidate the most appropriate qualification qualification for them to take, the correct level they should be taking it at, and the optional units which fits their job role. By doing this, you will avoid the candidate taking a qualification which is not suitable for their role, and the units selected do not match. Assessment activity. This is where the assessment either takes place or the candidate is preparing evidence of assessment to take place. Candidate produces the evidence. Referring to the assessment plan produced, the candidate will be able to collate the evidence necessary for the assessor to assess on the next assessment visit. This evidence can be something produced at work, such as a specification, snagging list, or signed delivery notes, or answers to written questions that the candidate has completed. This can be presented for assessment either at next assessor visit or before if required. Can a summative or formative? This assessment being carried out will be either formative, which is where assessment is being carried out during the candidate's time on the qualification, or summative, which is at the end of the qualification. For the summative assessment, the assessor is checking that all the required evidence has been produced and if there are any gaps, completing these with the candidate. Evidence completed independently by the candidate. It is important that the candidate is able to complete assessment tasks during the assessor visits, as this lets them progress with achieving their qualification without having to wait for the assessor to be present. The assessor also needs to ensure the candidate has completed the evidence themselves without the help of others. This is easily carried out, as the assessor could question the candidate about the evidence produced, and the answers given will quickly highlight if the candidate has produced the work or not. Assessment activity with the assessor. This is where the evidence is generated with the assessor present and is normally either produced by assessor observation or verbal questioning of the candidate. However, it may also be that the candidate is able to produce documentary evidence when asked by the assessor, such as site risk assessment or delivery note signed for the candidate for the job they are working on. Produced within target date. It is helpful to encourage the candidate to produce the evidence by the target date set, as this keeps the candidate on track and on target to complete by the set date. However, this date is not set in stone, and sometimes the needs for the business overtake the need to generate evidence, and so these dates need to be flexible, and the assessor needs to understand that sometimes the candidate is focused on other things. However, it's good to motivate the candidate to do what they can to meet these dates. When the assessor has assessed the evidence, they need to make a written record of the assessment they have carried out. Uses centre, devised or award body paperwork. The assessor needs to record the outcome of the assessment on official paperwork. This could be on a centre designed paperwork or paperwork produced by an awarding body, and in some cases such as the GQA, they can use both. An assessor might also use an e-portfolio to record the outcome of the assessment on. Shares with candidate and keeps copy for self. It is a good practice to give the candidate a copy of the assessment record in their portfolio and for the assessor to keep a copy as well. This is important as it keeps the candidate to keep a track of what they have completed and how far they have progressed in their qualification. It is also good for both the assessor and candidate to keep a copy just in case one gets lost. It may be that the outcome record is entered into an e-portfolio system. In this instance, there is no need to keep the candidate a copy, as they will have access to their e-portfolio. In all cases, it is important that assessment decision records are signed by both the assessor and the candidate to show they both agree with the outcome. Written records are kept for audit purposes. The records of any decisions made are kept for auditing by either the internal quality assurer or the external quality assurer. These are also important in case an appeal is made by the candidates as well. These records are to be kept for a period of 3 Now that the candidate has produced the evidence, it is up to the assessor to assess it. Assessing evidence produced. The assessor will assess any evidence that the candidate has produced. It is here that the assessor will review the evidence that the candidate has been asked to produce in the assessment plan. If the candidate has produced more than has been asked or adds evidence not on the plan, this can still be assessed by the assessor. Assess against the criteria. The assessor's role is to assess the evidence only against the criteria within the qualification standards the candidate is undertaking. The assessor should not impose their own or their company's own standards on the evidence produced. The criteria in the units are based on the National Occupation Standard, and it is this that sets the standard the candidate has to achieve. Identifies what criteria is met and what has not. The assessor assesses the evidence produced to identify where the criteria has been met and when it has not. Their role is to identify from the evidence produced where the candidate is competent and where more evidence is needed. Assessor makes a decision on all evidence produced. The assessor needs to take a holistic look at the evidence being produced on one piece of evidence or a group of evidence may meet the criteria in more than one unit, and it is the role of the assessor to get the most value from evidence produced by assessing it in a holistic way. This can The final role of the assessor is to provide feedback to the candidate on what they have achieved and what is outstanding. The assessor informs the candidate of their decision. The first piece of feedback is for the assessor to inform the candidate on the outcome of the assessment and what the findings have been. Informs where criteria has been met and not met. The assessor needs to explain how the evidence provided has met the criteria, give examples of what the candidate did to meet the criteria. The assessor also needs to explain why the criteria was not met and give evidence to back this up. It is the assessor's role to clearly identify what has and has not been met and the reasons why. Here they also need to give the candidate a chance to question the decision so they can understand how the outcome of the assessment was arrived at. Identifies where further development was needed. It may be that the candidate did not achieve the required criteria because they did not have the required skills level or knowledge to complete the assessment correctly. The assessor then needs to speak with the candidate to give them some ideas on what they can do to develop these areas, so they can achieve the required standard next time they are assessed. Plans for next steps in the assessment process. Once the feedback has been given and any further development needed, the final step is to put together an assessment plan for the candidate to start work on to produce the next set of evidence. This should outline what evidence the candidate needs to produce, how it will be assessed, and when it is needed to be produced by. By planning next steps at the end of the feedback, it keeps the candidate focused and motivated to complete their qualification. Identifies changes to the assessment process. While progressing through the qualification, it may be that some things have been identified as needing changing from the process outlined in the initial holistic assessment plan. For example, it may be the candidate's job role has changed, so another unit needs to be chosen, or there is a change to work in practice, which means the evidence set at the beginning of the process needs to be reviewed and amended to reflect current work practices. It is always good practice to review the holistic plan just to ensure that everything is still progressing well. So let's conclude by summarizing what we have covered on the assessment cycle. There are 6 parts to the assessment cycle, and when an assessor assesses a candidate, they will go through all 6 parts of the process during their time with him. The 6 parts are: 1. Initial assessment of the candidate. 2. Planning the assessment, both holistically and ongoing. 3. The assessment activities the candidate works through. 4. The assessor assesses the evidence. 5. The assessor records the outcome. 6. The assessor gives feedback and reviews the candidate's progress.